So, with that, let me introduce our speaker. And if I could, might ask you to hold your applause for a moment. But look around these walls, and as you can tell, this building has been here for a while. And there's some amazing things that have happened in this building, both past, present, and future. In February 1887, the great abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison stood where I stood to speak to this congregation and community about the abolition struggle. And the Reverend Charles Fletcher Dole was the pastor of this church for 40 years, from 1876 to 1916, during the first Gilded Age, during an unusual period of extreme inequality in the life of our country. He was a co-founder. This is the pastor of this church, was the co-founder of the Anti-Imperialist League, opposing the U.S. war in the Philippines. A young woman sat in these pews listening to Reverend Charles Fletcher Dole. She was inspired to work and dedicate her life to peace. Her name was Emily Green Balch, and she started the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And she won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1946. She has spoken here. So I want to give you a sense that our speaker tonight is part of a chain of events that go from the past to the present to the future. And I might ask, are there any people in the room who are under 35? If you would stand. Stand up just for a moment. If you're under 35. Thank you. So that's the past. Our speaker tonight is the present. You are our future, and we want to honor that, like Emily Green Balch sitting in these pews, you too may go on and win the Nobel Peace Prize or some other distinction. These walls, Senator Sanders, have heard voices of compassion, of rebellion, of love, and they have also heard calls for abolition, women's suffrage, gay and lesbian liberation, justice for immigrants, and many other issues and causes. But above all, these walls and this congregation has heard courageous people. Our speaker today is part of that tradition. In early December, President Obama signaled that he was going to compromise with Republican leaders to extend tax cuts for the wealthy, to institute an estate tax reform that would gut the law and further concentrate wealth and power in the hands of a few. On Friday, December 10th, Senator Bernard Sanders stepped into the floor of the U.S. Senate and began speaking. He spoke for 8.5 hours. The speech hit a nerve. Millions of people followed it online until the internet traffic at the U.S. Senate crashed the servers. A huge grassroots groundswell jammed the phone lines in protest. Around the United States and the world, millions of people stood in front of their TVs and their computers and watched the senator's speech. They sent links to their friends. Many of those people were watching in a room with just 2 or 3 people. Maybe they were watching alone. But I bet that they wanted to give Senator Sanders a standing ovation. And so we're honored today because we're fortunate here in Jamaica Plain to be able to show Senator Sanders our gratitude in person and welcome him to Jamaica Plain. Senator Bernard Sanders. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for being here in this very beautiful church. Chuck, thank you very much. You have thoroughly intimidated me already compared to all those great heroic figures who have spoken here. I was thinking about what I wanted to say, and in a sense, there's not much that I can tell you that you don't already know. So we'll talk about what you know, and that is there are some profound and deep problems in our country. And I think perhaps the most significant of all of the problems is that we don't talk about the significant problems facing our country. And I think if we could simply place out there on the agenda, on the table, what is in the hearts and minds of millions and millions of Americans, throw it out on the table. Let's talk about the reality facing the people of our country, I think just in doing that, we would make a profound improvement and change in terms of what's going on. And in many ways, that's why I gave this speech. Yes, I was totally disgusted by the agreement struck between the president and the Republican leadership, which provided hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires, which lowered the estate tax, which benefits only the top 0.3%. I was very, very worried about this so-called payroll tax holiday, which, while it is in fact going to put money into people's paychecks today, it is beginning the process of diverting huge sums of money from our Social Security Trust Fund. And if we continue doing that, Social Security will be endangered. I was upset about all of those things, but I was upset about more. And that there is a profound change taking place in this country. We need to get it out on the table, and we need to talk about it. And what is that profound change? Mostly that profound change is that the great middle class of our country is in the midst of a severe collapse. A severe collapse. And the American dream, which has always meant for millions of people what it meant for my parents. My father came to this country without a nickel in his pocket. He had dropped out of high school, and he never made any money. But he saw his kids be able to get a college education and do better than my mom and father did. And that was what the American dream was about. Can we enable our kids to have a better life than we have? And today there are tens of millions of people all over this country not only worried about what's happening to them, and there's a lot to worry about, they are more worried about the future for their kids. What kind of jobs? What kind of jobs are their kids going to have? 30 or 40 years ago, some of you my age may remember, that just give a few examples, you could go to the University of California, one of the great universities in America. You know what tuition was 40 years ago? It was free. You can go to the great city universities of New York. I spent 1 year at Brooklyn College, if my memory is correct. Tuition was free because we believe that it's important that all of our people, regardless of their income, be able to get a college education. And every day now, every week, I hear from young people in the state of Vermont who's saying, you know, Senator, I graduated from college, I'm $40,000 in debt, I'm making $12 an hour. I can barely pay off my debt, let alone take care of my other needs. So the issue that we are talking about is the collapse of the middle class. Why is that happening? And how do we turn it around? That's the issue. And you know those issues as well as I do. If you are a working person in my state, and I'm sure true in Massachusetts, any other state in this country, what you know now is that it takes two breadwinners to pay the bills. You know, one of the things that happens is young people have no historical perspective. When I was growing up, do you know what being in the middle class was about? Young people won't believe me, but it's true. It was one person, in those days mostly the man, working 40 hours a week, earning enough money to take care of the whole family. I know for the young people they don't believe that. Very radical concept. One person working 40 hours a week, earning enough money to take care of the family. You know what the reality is today? The reality today is that a two-income family, and the vast majority of the people that we know who are in the working class or middle class are two-income families, that at the end of the day, that two-income family has less disposable income than a one-income family had 30 years ago. And people are wondering, how did that happen? Meanwhile, we've seen an explosion in technology. I was elected mayor, as Chuck mentioned to you, mayor of the largest city in Vermont, Burlington, Vermont, in 1981. When I took office in Burlington, Vermont in 1981, there was not one computer in the building. Time has changed. One might assume that with all of that explosion in technology, all of the cell phones and computers and robotics and flat screen TVs, that as a result of all of that increased productivity, the middle class would be stronger. I can remember, again, hard for young people to understand, there were courses being given in college. When I was in college, you know what the course was? What will the American people do with all of their leisure time? That's true. Because as a result of the explosion of technology, instead of having to work 40 hours a week, maybe workers would be employed 30 hours a week, 20 hours a week. What a challenge. They don't teach those courses anymore. Now what they teach is how do you raise kids when mom and dad are both working longer than 40 hours. I will never forget, I was out at a grocery store and a woman came up to me and she said, you know, Bernie, we have one kid, my husband and I have one kid, we'd like to have more, but we're not going to do it because he's working 3 jobs and I'm working 2 jobs and we just don't think we can be the parents that we want to be. We're not going to have more kids. And that's the story all over America. So put it on the table. Why is it that with the explosion of technology and the increase of productivity, our people in this country work the longest hours of any people in the industrialized world? Do you know that? We work the longest hours. And then people wonder why are workers exhausted? Why are marriages being stressed out? Why are parents not being able to spend the quality time they want with their kids? And the reason is, to a significant degree, is a lot of people are simply plain old exhausted. Exhausted. Because they're working so hard trying to make ends meet. You have parents today, mother and father are working, they need decent quality childcare, affordable childcare, almost impossible to find in this country. We've got millions of kids who are growing up in childcare, sitting in front of a television screen with untrained people watching them, when we know that the first 3 years of a child's life are the most important years of his or her entire life. In America today, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any country on earth. You know that of any major country? 20%, 1 in 5 of our kids are living in poverty. And shock of all shocks, we end up having more people in jail than any other country. China is a communist, authoritarian country, much larger than we are. We have more people in jail than China has. And if you don't see the connection between childhood poverty, between kids dropping out of school, getting involved in drugs or self-destructive activity, and then ending up in jail, then you don't know what's going on. But we don't invest in our kids, we don't invest in our children, but we do invest in our jails. So while our middle class is collapsing for a variety of reasons, there is another phenomenon taking place in this country that we just don't talk about for obvious reasons. And that phenomenon is that the people on top today are doing better than they have ever done. The crooks on Wall Street, whose illegal and reckless behavior helped drive this country into a recession, are now giving themselves more compensation than they did before we bailed them out. But it's not just the people on Wall Street. CEOs all over this country earning fabulous salaries, and in fact we are now in a situation where the top 1% of income earners, top 1%, earn more income than do the bottom 50%. You got that? 1%, 50%. That's income. In terms of wealth, top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. And that gap between the very, very rich and everybody else gets wider and wider and wider. 30 years ago, top 1% earned about 8-9% of all income in America. That's a lot. Today, the top 1% earns 23% of all income. Got that? Of every $100, 23 of those dollars goes to the top 1%. Now, why is the middle class collapsing? There are a number of reasons. Let me touch on just a couple. In Massachusetts, in Vermont, in the Midwest, all over this country, we actually were a country that produced products that people consumed. Now when you go shopping or you go to the store and you buy a product, you automatically assume that it was made in China. And you're really surprised if you come across a product made in the United States of America. In the last 10 years, we have lost as a nation 42,000 factories. 42,000 factories and millions of decent paying manufacturing jobs. And we have the heads of large corporations, whether it's General Electric or you name it, basically standing up publicly. And when I gave that speech on the floor of the Senate, I quoted Jeff Immelt. Jeff Immelt is the CEO of General Electric. And this is what he said a number of years ago. He said, when I look at the future of General Electric, I see China, China, China. The head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce made it very clear and very publicly that he thought outsourcing was a good idea for corporate America because, in so many words, why would you want to pay an American worker 15 or 20 bucks an hour, provide health care, obey environmental regulations, when you can go to China and pay people 50 cents an hour? I was in Vietnam last year, beautiful country. People there work for 25 cents an hour. When you buy a shirt, check out the label, and if it's made in Bangladesh, understand that it is likely made by a young woman who moved into the city from the countryside. The good news in Bangladesh is that last year they doubled the minimum wage for those girls. It's now up to 23 cents an hour.